Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Good morning and glad to have you join us as always on that program that sets the pace for your day, that program that gives you the sense of direction when it comes to issues related to business, finance, and the economy. It's the Friday edition of the program. Thank God it's Friday. So we often say here, you know, there's this vibe, this glam that comes with Friday, and we're starting on that note this morning. You know, we always do updates on Friday, and our update today is going to start from India, where we're looking at the economic projection for India, where India is projecting to be a $10 trillion economy by the year 2032. That sounds like a dream that should be realized, isn't it? We're going to look at that, look at what needs to be done to ensure that India repositions itself. And the desire is to reposition its economy ahead of that of US and that of UK, perhaps to be the largest in the world. But we're going to look at how possible that is going to be. And another good news is the fact that the federal government has decided to put smiles in the faces of core members in Nigeria by increasing their allowance from 33,000 naira to 77,000 naira. In respect to the provision of the new Minimum Wage Act signed into law by the president a few months ago. That sounds like good news for core members, what we popularly call alawi. You know, it's a good time for core members, you know, for them to do smoyanga, and it's Friday. So let's give them that privilege. All right, I'm not alone. As usual, the table is full now. We have Blessing here, who is also smiling because the allowance for core members.
No, it's not allowance. It can't be about the allowance because I'm not a core member.
And anything really brings excitement.
No. That doesn't bring excitement to me because it doesn't affect me in any way.
Yeah.
The only thing that makes me smile is that it's Friday.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yes, thank God it's Friday.
So I could read in between the lines.
I know you did that to pull my legs, so it will be you out in the secret. I'll just do that by myself. But for the 77,000, I think, I don't know, it's like when you have a last child, you know, the last born thing. So after giving other children what you have for them,
Yeah.
the last one sort of gets extra. Maybe that's the thinking of the federal government. So that's where the federal government is coming from by making minimum wage 70,000 and making the core members alawi 77,000. So there's extra of 7,000 being like, okay, you're the freshest, you're the youngest. In the labor market, you are like at the bottom.
I read one interesting comment from someone who was asking if he can come back for his youth service now.
Yes. If I said that yesterday, that some persons will be wishing they deferred. Those who were still within, those who had not served, they wish they deferred and say, I'm serving now. Those who they served last year. And some are wishing, can I just go back? Maybe if they're not employed yet, can I just go back and do youth service? So that's 77K every month. Well, that's a good one from the federal government. Though we don't understand the rationale, although they say it's the Minimum Wage Amendment Act 2024. So I'm wondering, does that apply to civil servant? It does 77,000. 7K is not bad.
Some state governments have made promises to start paying by October, like Edo State and some other states, the minimum wage, which is 70,000 there. So
are they paying 70,000 to 77,000?
No, for core members, 77.
And that's what I'm asking. Does this amendment act that makes it possible to pay core members 77,000, does it apply to civil servants?
No, that of civil servants is 70,000. You call it minimum. So in your own wisdom,
so this is maximum wage for core members. Well, I think Sam is waiting to react to that. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think it's in line with a new policy initiative of the federal government. So if there's a minimum threshold of 70,000 naira as where you can operate from, therefore, university graduates who are already serving as core member getting 77,000 as an allowance, I think is a major boost in terms of what they take away. Each time I see this increment, I just look back what I collected and I see the value of the naira that has really fallen below. I wouldn't mention the figure of and the amount
I
I
think
collected
people were
because I don't put me
people
to.
were
No, I can
to mention the figure. It just
mention
to reveal lots of things.
I collected a little above 9,000 there. So see the match.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what you collect.
No, but I think at your time that 9,000 had much value. You could do a lot with
Yeah,
it.
that's it.
Okay.
And in fact, I think the increase came, that's a
Okay.
month after our, what you call the orientation activity. It used to be 7,000 plus, so they added 2,000. But I'm not jealous. And
I started with
can't
one round.
believe-
I started with 150 naira,
Oh,
man.
back in
and
the
it was
day.
increased to 200.
Oh, wow. We're already getting into the
Yes,
second topic because it's quite interesting. And I think that core members are happy. Good enough. We have some of them at Souq News. So they should be buying some things with their new Alawi and say, hey, you didn't get 77K in your time. Take some. I'm just joking because they still will never admit that it
Interestingly,
is
they are
not.
collecting 2 months arrears of that money.
You can understand from
you get-
July,
what a-
July, August, September. Oh my goodness!
what a
But
good
they will
time
never
for them.
admit it's enough. They keep telling you that's not enough. We spent so much, but I think it's better, more than twice what it used to be.
Yeah,
33,000
it's the starting
naira.
point.
Mm.
All right. Before we get deeper into the core member thing, it looks like we are being trapped to discuss it first.
You know what money does?
So let's start with India, which India is projecting to be a $10 trillion economy by the year 2032. You know, when you hear this kind of projection, you're wondering, you give it a kind of mixed feeling, you know. But let me find out from Sam. How do you react when you have this kind of projection coming from India, given the track record or what the Prime Minister has been doing in recent times? Are you that optimistic that this dream, I call it a dream now the desire to expand the GDP by 10 trillion in the year 2032, how do you react to this kind of news?
I think there's no misfeeling about it. India has been strategic from when it gained independence in 1947 from the British. And between 1947 and 2010, they were able to move their GDP to 1 trillion, which was a remarkable feat. But when Modi came in 2014, he put some policy initiative in place that has stimulated economic growth in India, particularly with Make in India initiative that provided a lot of incentive for manufacturing and assembly plants that has encouraged a lot of manufacturing into India. So if you look at the global industrial production index, is estimated by 2032, which is the benchmark year for this $10 trillion economy. India has been projected to overtake China, the United States of America, and UK in terms of its economic fortune. So, and I think they've been deliberate since 2017 by having a policy initiative that every 18 months, $1 trillion will be added to the economy. So if you do the mathematics, just add 7 or 8 years, this is 2024 to 2032, therefore, it is possible. And that trend has been there in the last how many years. So they will even go above that, that mark. And mind you, India is the home to ICT, and they have made major contributions. So if you look at the best companies, 100 companies in the world, about 90% of them are managed by India. So those elements have implication for manufacturing, which is core of India industrial policy initiative, driven by Modi, who did very well in the state of Gujarat as a minister, and he has transformed India beyond, particularly with the initiative on Make in India initiative, plus another initiative that promotes manufacturing called Production Link Initiative. So those initiatives has positioned India to get to that benchmark.
All right, so but if we look at it, the plan of or the projection of India to increase the worth of their economy from about $3.75 trillion, which it stood at last year, to about $10 trillion by the year 2032. Well, that may look like it's quite feasible given the progression that you just analyzed, how they intend to progress their economy. But in terms of overtaking the US and China in manufacturing, do you think that India has that capability?
India has the capacity and the capability, and I just mentioned the Industrial Production Index, which is a metrics for measuring companies that has capacity for manufacturing. India is at the top, and based on their own production initiative, they have their own initiative that drive manufacturing. And if you look at the policy framework of 18 months, that's about 1.5 years, that 1 trillion will be added to the economy. Then if they have grown that economy from 2010 to a 3-point-something trillion. So if you just do, that's approximately 8 years, and you just add 1 trillion, maybe by 1.5 years, into 2032, then that figure is achievable, and they have milestones already put in place to get to that level of development. And I'm sure India will get to that level.
All right, India could get to that level, but beating the US, will the US stand still? Will China, of all countries, that is actually into manufacturing in a way that the world has never really seen, using manpower, using machine, and exporting to other countries, would they stand by and watch India beat them, overtake the market?
Yeah, beyond the international politics and conspiracy from the global north, particularly the US and maybe China, I think when you talk about global competitiveness, the issue of politics may not stand. India is exporting ICT massively, even to this other country. And now that they have a policy initiative back home to drive this process, it might be very difficult with the level of conspiracy from the West to be able to put India down. That initiative is there. Their manufacturing outlook is very good. And the ICT, in terms of AI-generated machine tools and all that, India is top-notch in that arena. And I'm sure they will get into that space. And nothing is sacrosanct or cast in stone in the international arena, in spite of the politics. And I think India is well prepared to compete with those other countries with the kind of policy options and the capacity they have to drive that process. So the Global Industrial Production Index is an initiative of one of the financial institutions in the US that has been driving that process. So those indicators are showing that India will even surpass even this projection by 2032. So how it plays out remains to be seen based on your question. But if you look at the trajectory in terms of economic growth, the deliberate policy in manufacturing, the deliberate policy in terms of bringing assembly plants with a lower cost of production, the cost of labor, because Modi actually took the Indian labor law that reduced some of the imperatives that were like bottlenecks in employment, in companies able to hire and fire. So those policy regime had favored some manufacturing companies that have found a kind of safe haven in manufacturing in India, particularly even pharmaceutical. If you look at the partnership or collaboration between Nigeria and India in terms of pharmaceutical products that comes in, and look at that element and you disaggregate it vis-a-vis the general GDP, representing about 32-point-something% for manufacturing, maybe another 25 for some other elements to grow that economy. I'm sure India should be able to get to that level.
Now, when you talk about GDP, it's usually a reflection of the total number of goods and services that have been produced locally. And India is considering looking at the manufacturing sector to drive this initiative. Do you consider that to be strategic? And what is so peculiar about the manufacturing sector in India that they are counting about, 32% value to the GDP, and then driving this kind of initiative between now and the year 2032?
The core of any nation is productivity. So when you have productivity, you have disposable income, everything in the economy is working, then you can energize economic growth. So since they have a policy initiative that is critical to their own economic growth and development, and they stay on course in terms of the figures and incentive they want to drive in that process. So manufacturing is core. So that is a basic element. And they are encouraging, they provide incentive for companies to come to India. So you have tax holidays, you have cheap labor that drive those processes. So once those kind of safe havens in the place for industrialists, investors, they have no other option than put their investment in India. And I'd say that's one of the reasons that Modi is having that bragging right that by 2032, they should be able to be competing or at the same level with China, United States of America, and possibly the UK. So those are some of the issues. So the policy framework is there. The enabling environment to drive that process is also in place. Therefore, and they have the intellectual and the creative capacity and the innovative capacity of the workforce to drive that process. So, and they have a big foundation in terms of STEM education. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is core. And India has been exporting these elements. So exports is seen to be about 25% of the GDP every 18 months to the level of 2032. And I have no doubt in my mind. So if you look at those statistics, the one from their own production link initiative that drive manufacturing assembly plant. If you look at the global industrial production index, India is already at the very top, and the figures are showing positive. And to that extent, we can see that it can compete favorably with China, and they will be at that level of play.
All things being equal.
Yes, all things cannot be equal. Even the economist ceteris paribus has already been other things being equal. All things cannot be equal. But if you look at the analysis and look at the projection, an era where machine tool has become very critical or as an enabler for measuring successes of nations, individual companies, then those projections based on those analyses will come into play by those years based on those extrapolations that they have made. And if you look at the trajectory from 1947 to 2010 to 2019 to 2020 and 2018, then those figures will get to that level.
All right. Away from the competition that could ensue or already exist with India, China, and the US, as well as other countries, what benefits would India's increase in manufacturing bring to the global market? Now, India is known for production of textiles, apparels, pharmaceuticals, automotive. It has a green automotive industry, agricultural products, as well as services, outsourcing of certain services, financial services as well. So what benefits will India's increase in manufacturing and even in its services bring to the global markets?
They're already playing at that space. If you talk about service delivery, even the financial service sector, let's take Africa, for example. Most of the financial institutions, even the fintech institutions, rely essentially on the services that they get from India. So that outsourcing regime in terms of business outsourced to other part of the world, they're going to play at that level because they have the level of capacity, ingenuity, creativity, and innovation to drive that process. Their manufacturing will enhance local productivity. And once there's productivity vis-a-vis the population of India, over 1.something billion people in that environment. Therefore, and I say that there are labor law that favor manufacturing and assembly plants. To that extent, once that is in place, productivity is increased, then you have more disposable income, people have more money to spend. Then if you look at the role of India, even in the diaspora, in terms of remittances, what goes back to India is very massive. So those elements will continue to drive that economy for a long time to come.
You were almost answering my next question, but it's also good. You're heading towards the right direction. One of the strategies being deployed by India is to promote what we call Made in India initiative.
Make in India.
To encourage local production. Talk to us. What will be the impact of these in helping to expand the GDP?
Like I said earlier, Make in India initiative is one of the elements of Production Link Initiative, which is a major plank of the Modi administration. First and foremost, when it came in 2014, it was re-elected 5 years later. And that initiative on a sustainable manner is to promote key manufacturing, providing incentive, providing tax haven, providing opportunity for assembly plant to come to India. So that deliberate policy option will continue to drive that GDP. And they've been very purposeful in terms of driving that policy framework. In that regard, therefore, Make in India initiative is one of the flagship policy framework of the Modi administration to energize industrial revolution in India. And because they have the capacity, they have the skill set, and they have all the elements that you need to drive manufacturing, then in that regard, therefore, the Make in India initiative will continue to sustain economic growth and development and be a major driver for the $10 trillion economy that is being projected for the next 8 years or thereabouts.
So the Make in India initiative makes India a manufacturing hub, but there are several other manufacturing hubs in the world. There is the Vietnam manufacturing hub. There are also some of them in
even in
Europe.
Germany.
Germany, some countries in Europe, some countries in Asia being manufacturing hub. But if you look at the manufacturing hubs across the globe, it seems India has some advantage. Are there certain advantage that Make in India gives India that kind of puts it over other manufacturing hub at this time?
No, I think so. I think earlier in the conversation, I spoke to that fact that India is the world capital when you talk about ICT. And if you look at it from factor endowment, what we call comparative advantage, India has that advantage. So in terms of global competitiveness, India is already playing in that sector. Because if you look at the export in terms of ICT alone, India is leading in that direction. So they have that competitive advantage in terms of STEM, which is a hallmark of industrial revolution. So that industrial hub will continue to be a major driver in terms of the global economy. Because in terms of capacity, in terms of skill set, even in terms of industrial development attitude, India will continue to play at the highest level. So they have the competitive advantage and they have the factor endowment that will shape that initiative for a long time.
Let's look at what qualifies a place or a region to be a manufacturing hub. One of them could be infrastructure, it could be labor force, it could be access to markets, it could also be the availability of raw materials. Now, if we'll take a look at some of these things I've highlighted and look at Africa, we find that Africa has labor force, has access, it also has the raw materials. But what is lacking is infrastructure. What is wrong, or what is the issues with Africa capitalizing on these other factors to make it a manufacturing hub for the rest of the world?
I just mentioned factor endowment, which you spoke to as you were trying to raise your question. The point here is that in Africa, we have a challenge of leadership and policy somersault, where a country puts a framework, policy framework in place that drives that process in terms of development. But in Africa, because of the colonial configuration, the 54 or 55 country that make up Africa has different policy framework, have different political leadership, have different agenda. Therefore, you are not able to galvanize the other factors or factor endowment. If you talk about capital, you talk about labor, you talk about the enabling law and environment that sustain industrial development. Those elements beyond infrastructure is lacking in Africa. Therefore, this policy of taking our primary products away to the global north, even to India and China, doesn't help in terms of our industrial development. So at the continental level, the advisory will be, let's put a continental policy framework in place. Even some that we have in place can even drive the process of industrialization or industrial revolution for that place. So in comparison to India, there's a framework that drives the process. There's a visionary leadership that is staying on the curve or on the course to drive that process.
All right. Globally, countries are dealing with high cost of living, and so India is not exempted. And so the plan by the Indian government is to see how they can increase minimum wage by next week. The plan is to increase it by 1,035 Indian rupees per day. What will be the impact of this on improving the level of productivity and perhaps also impact on this projection for India?
No, the productivity is already there, and it is based on the indices of productivity that the wage in terms of what people earn daily is going to be improved upon. So that sector will drive process. So as you're able to grow the economy, then the wage element or salary element will improve. And the disposable income that is available, government will earn more taxes. When people have money to go to the market, then they are able to pay taxes. Then manufacturing are able to put products for the consumer in the marketplace, and those products are sold. And the economy is energized, and everybody is happy. So I think that increase is a welcoming development, and that will energize even those people who want to bring investment in terms of building manufacturing plants in India, and see the level of even exports of human capital, even from India, will equally increase, and the number of remittances that comes into India will equally improve. So it's going to be a win-win situation for those who are bringing investment in, a win-win situation for the government, a win-win situation for the citizen. And mind you, the population is so large. So India and China in the last 20 years has brought a meaningful number of people from poverty to economic prosperity, and that will continue to improve. Essentially, and that's the role of any government, to improve on the welfare and security of its citizens.
All right, now looking at India and the US and China having strategically taken over the global markets with how they position, even some of the industries in China are US industries, manufacturing in China. And if you look at some of them in China, in India too, are US industry. Now, some countries may have the capital for production, but do not really have other factors. Can they take a cue from what the US has done?
No, that's for global competitiveness. What is important is if you look at the various factors of endowment, where do you think you can put your capital? Where do you think you can get relatively priced labor so that you can do your business? So I think the India initiative should be an encouragement to some other countries who want to take that viable policy option to drive their own process. Therefore, whether US could go to India to do manufacturing, the reason of going to India is to see that there's a cheap labor cost vis-a-vis when they put that plant back in the US. So countries that have certain endowment will continually get investment into their environment. And once those investments come to their environment, then it's just a win-win situation, even for the investors and the country where those businesses are domiciled.
But if you also look at what happens in a manufacturing hub where you have lots of investors citing their companies there, does it pose a threat to indigenous companies. How do you think India has been able to balance it?
No, I don't think it poses a threat. Rather, is an enabler in terms of transfer of technology, human resource element. So you're able to build capacity. So some manufacturing that will come have ancillary service sector that serve those industry. Therefore, it becomes beneficial. So you bring a manufacturing, maybe a car manufacturing company, then the other ancillary products that manufacture the accessories of the car that supply those other factor inputs to the core manufacturing industry. So I don't think it's a threat. It's an enabler to other ancillary service sector with the other economy that can take advantage. And I think that's the deliberate policy India has put in place. Okay, you have a good tax regime or a holiday that enable you to recoup part of your investment. Therefore, while you are doing that, you are developing a local, some other subsector of the manufacturing industry that take advantage of the major manufacturing hub. So, by and large, it's beneficial, rather not an impediment or it has a negative impact on the local manufacturing center. Rather, it's improved on those capacity for them to be able to serve those core manufacturing hubs.
Interesting. Now, it's no longer a breaking news that India is projecting to be a $10 trillion economy by 2032. But I want us to bring in the concept of SWOT analysis into this. We've talked about the strengths, we've talked about the opportunities, but let's talk about the weakness and the threat as well. You know, we can't say all is good for India now, and so they need to just sit comfortably that, okay, the year 2032, this is going to be realized. Let's also look at other factors that could be of challenge to India and that they need to tackle or manage now for them to be able to achieve this dream. One of them is also the issue of aging population. So what are other factors that you think India needs to put in place, like could be of stress or weakness that could ravage achieving this kind of...
Okay, if you use the SWOT analysis, I think India, in terms of strength and opportunity, is higher. So what do you do? If you do a SWOT analysis, the two critical elements is strength and opportunity. So you play up your strength and opportunity, then you diffuse your weaknesses. But what is important, why these projections are to a very large extent accurate, they are local issues. So if you add it to your SWOT analysis, you now do what you call PESTA analysis, political, social, technology, and legal environment. So the political environment in India, to a very large extent, is tense. So the new nationalism in India between the Hindus and the Muslim has always been a major tension arena in terms of the India political economy. But overall analysis, if you look at some of these other factors you talked about, I think the strength and opportunities far outweigh threats and weaknesses. Therefore, even in management, you say you don't focus more on the weaknesses or threats. Rather, you emphasize the strength and opportunity. So you're able to pull up your elements. So even in human resource, you emphasize the strength of your workforce while you try to diffuse their weaknesses, then create more opportunity for them to grow. So in businesses as well, those factors are critical. So if you look at the variables and all the elements of analysis, the strengths and opportunity far outweigh. Even if you put them in percentage, they are far above 50%. Why they deal with the local issues, then the core focus of manufacturing would be a major policy framework that will continue to put India in the global map.
Why I agree with you, it's also important to put things in perspective. When you are aware of your strengths and your opportunities, it's also good you are aware of your weaknesses and the threat for planning. And
of course, that is already in place. So when you put a policy initiative, they will have done all the scenario planning for the next 8 years. So each of those opportunities, strength, you match them with the weaknesses and threat and see how you can diffuse those weaknesses and threat. So the focus is to get a $10 trillion economy in spite of those challenges.
Okay, still talking about SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Let's take a look at Africa. Interestingly, the GDP of Africa as of 2023 is almost the same as India, $3.75 trillion. Do you find that appalling that the GDP of a country is almost equal to the GDP of a continent using the same SWOT analysis? Could you speak to the strength, weakness, opportunities, and even threats of Africa? And how can Africa use its strength to make less the threat that it has, or maximize the strength that it has in the economy to grow? It may not be like the dream of India to make it a $10 trillion economy.
I think
it
it should be.
Can Africa
All right,
do
no,
that?
sorry. Yeah.
It could be maybe a $5 trillion economy, could be maybe 8, but $3.7 trillion for Africa as a continent, as against $3.7 trillion economy for India as a country. Don't you think that's too much?
Let's just go beyond the geography. If you look at the population of Africa as a collective and look at that of India, it's almost at par. So look at it from that analysis. So we'll put them into the quadrant of SWOT analysis. Africa has primary commodity, which is a major strength, but this ability to turn this primary commodity into a manufacturing hub has been a major impediment to African development in the last 60-something years of where most African countries became independent. So, and I spoke to that earlier, the political leadership is not homogeneous to a very large extent. So you have various interests playing in Africa. You have the Portuguese playing their own game. You have the French playing their own game. You have the English playing their own game. So it becomes very difficult to come to a point of convergence in terms of policy framework. Like I mentioned in subsequent interaction in one of your programs, Africa has put a policy framework in place to trade among Africa since 2021. That policy framework is still wobbling after so many years. So until we're able to come to that realization that for you to do well as a continent, whether as a country, then you must be deliberate, particularly in terms of industrial policy. Because once you have a good industrial policy, then your national productivity is enhanced. Therefore, you can drive revenue and taxes. Then your citizens will have a good source of livelihood that will translate again to you earning more money. So therefore, to answer your question simply, is that the political leadership must consider Africa as one industrial hub. They must trade among themselves. Then these fringes of colonial heritage must find a way to remove that lenses in terms of how we view development. So once we're able to come to terms or convergence in terms of industrial policy, then we can compete and even do better than India in the next 8 years.
Now, having highlighted the strength, the weaknesses of Africa and what Africa can do, what can the company, the businesses in Africa do to also grow it? For an economy to grow, it's not just about government. It's not just about the political class. The businesses too has something to learn. Now, if we look at the West, there are companies that also have subsidiaries in Africa that have lived or existed for way over 100 years, 200 years. The multinationals. How many multinationals can we say originated from Africa, have subsidiaries elsewhere? How many can we point to? What are the critical issues with businesses founded and run by Africans in Africa?
I think, Blessing, what is important here is if you do a global comparative analysis in terms of businesses, I think leadership or the government has a major role to play in driving those processes. What do I mean? you need to put a policy framework in place that drives development. So when you put those policy framework in place, the implementation, the execution, and the monitoring and evaluation of those policy framework must be seen to be working. But where you have a policy somersault, you have a lot of Western conspiracy, not wanting Africa to develop, and you have a leadership that is docile to development of its people, even in businesses. So the question really, essentially, why other people have various roles to play, but it's within the purview of African government or governments to put policy framework in place to drive that industrial development agenda like India that we'll be talking about. Once that is absent in terms of how we can drive Africa to the next destination, then we will continue to be like a pawn in the chess game of neoliberal Western democracy that is just mounting democracy, whereas they are pillaging the African continent. And I make no apologies about that until we have that discipline, because some other country, even India, got its independence from Britain in 1947. But their culture was retained even when, whereas African countries were seen still having the value of the colonizing master in terms of policy. You want to do anything, see, go to the UK to get a blessing before you do any policy initiative. So until we find a way to wean ourselves from this colonial overhang, there's little that Africans can do, but we must put that policy initiative in place. The African Union is trying to do something, but they are not disciplined enough, in quote, to be able to drive those processes. So when you go to those places for summit diplomacy and they are in the UN Assembly, canvassing for all kinds of things to come to Africa, but you have not put your home in order, but you're just canvassing. So do things that will make people respect you, make people bring money to your environment. Once you have development partners coming, corruption has been a major impediment to growth in Africa. So by and large, it's essentially about creating the environment, then looking inward, like the initiative Make in India. And we used to have some clamor, made in African good, made in Nigerian. To what extent do we sustain those policy framework or policy initiative? Once you don't sustain those things, then there's going to be a problem.
All right, let's get into this debate about the real concept and the value of GDP. There are those who argue that when you talk about GDP, it's only talking about size, not actually strength. You know, when it's not a true reflection of economic growth and development, it's just about size, which if you look at what is playing now is in most African countries, that could support that theory. But in the case of India, do you see an exception here? If they're projecting to hit 10 trillion naira economy, does it actually, apart from size of the economy, portray the real sense when it comes to economic growth and development? And then what value will this bring to India if perhaps by the year 2032 they achieve this milestone?
While GDP is nominal in nature, taking the sum aggregate of the productive base of any economy, that's one in terms of linear development model, where we just talk about growth. But then, when there's growth, it imparts development to a very large extent. But if we go into the debate of economic growth, GDP, and other indicators, we have other indicators for measuring the national wealth of countries beyond the GDP. But the GDP from the UN system has been the minimum threshold for measuring economic growth. So you have other economic development index, you have what we call quality of life index, the ratio of early childhood, what is the element of number of children that are in school. But by and large, once you have that nominal GDP, it will impact in some of these other variables that we just talked about. But essentially, if you can't grow the domestic product, then development will become a mirage. But then there are new debates where the UN system is trying to move away from GDP as a basis of economic calculation of national wealth. So we have what we call intermediate accounting, where national income beyond GDP should be measured in terms of the economic well-being, the environmental well-being. To what extent do you value the livelihood of people who depend on agri products beyond the final product? So, but that debate is ongoing. But this other element, which is GDP, will energize all these other variables. So if the GDP is growing a certain percentage, therefore it will impact in development. So if we are bringing manufacturing plants, some companies will build schools within that plant. They will employ teachers. So there will be some level of development.
Which will also impact economic growth. But the other side to the question is, if India by the year 2032 achieves this milestone, what value will it bring to India? What kind of perception or economic value will it bring to that nation?
No, there's no doubt if you can grow your GDP to that in 8 years, the implication is that your productivity, national productivity as a collective is enhanced. The number of people that are gainfully employed will improve. The number of exports, your manufacturing that you export to other countries will equally improve. Therefore, it will impact on the development of the country. So the welfare and security of Indian nationals will improve in 8 years based on the 1.5 year incremental development model that they've been pursuing since 2010. That would be a win-win situation for the national.
On a final note, does economic power equal political power? So if India moves up economically, does it also mean more political influence for India in the global space?
Of course. So if you look at the indices of power, one of the indices of power is economic might. So if their economic opportunity improve, therefore their play at the international arena will equally improve because they are major world power to reckon with because they have the economic power. So you cannot diffuse economy from politics. They go side by side. So once your economic power is improving, your political power and influence tangentially will equally improve. So once that happens, yes, India become a beautiful bride, the international arena.
All right, let's see what Nigeria could learn from India. Nigeria is also projecting to achieve 1 trillion naira, $1 trillion economy with what this administration is doing. Let's look at what are the takeaways for Nigeria, looking at what India is doing, the approach to expanding its GDP. What are some of the things that you think Nigeria can also imbibe to achieve its own dream?
Yeah, fundamentally, we must take the India model of education with a massive investment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that's one of the core of India. I recall growing up, a greater number of teachers that we had in the high school were Indians in the 70s, 80s, up to part of the 90s, before there was a reverse migration of Indians going back home. So fundamentally, number one, Nigeria must invest in education. I think we need a revolution in education. The kind of education that we have cannot take us anywhere. So fundamentally, we need a critical mass in education. Number two, the policy framework to sustain the 1 trillion projection for Nigeria must be sustained based on strong policy framework. Number 3, we must look inward to consume made in Nigeria. Maybe we'll borrow lessons from India rather than made in Nigeria, make in Nigerian products. That's number 3. Number 4.
What about the manufacturing sector?
I'm coming to that one. So number 4, you must provide a meaningful tax holiday for people when you create some economic zones or hubs that are not sustainable. Rather, you put a policy framework, whereas beyond the Lekki, some other free trade zone, you put a robust policy framework that will make people to bring investment in. Then security, number 5, is very essential. Nobody wants to come and invest in an insecure environment. So if you take these 5 major elements, there are other ones. So if you benchmark it with your SWOT analysis model, then these are the critical mass that can take us to where we want to be. But if we don't put that essentially about science, engineering, technology, and mathematics are the major driver of modern development. So we must make investment in human capital to drive that process.
Wow. Many thanks, Maruji, public and international affairs analyst, for dissecting the issues, looking at India's ambition, how it can come to be reality, and what other countries, particularly countries in Africa, can learn from it.
Thank you.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.